Tyloo has up until recently been considered the best team in China, and I guess for the greater Asia region as well, they've certainly been up there in the majority of the discussions since 2016, 2017. Certainly within 2018 and 2019, they were up there. But toward the end of 2019, they really did seem to start struggling quite a lot, and they sort of fell off a little bit. Once Excurate was removed from the team, I think that's where a lot of the problems started to come through again for Tyloo. And what's been really interesting to see is how they've bounced back from that in recent times. Obviously, toward the end of 2019, when Bntet left the roster, there was quite a scramble to find a lot of players, and this is where we sort of saw Freeman and Zeta come into the lineup, and Zeta, obviously coming from Korea, was touted to be sort of this star AWPer that would come into the roster and sort of reinvigorate things, because it's been a roster that's been without a good AWPer for quite a while. But once COVID-19 hit here in 2020, we've sort of seen this change up within the Tyloo roster. And quite frankly, I think that change up has actually been for the better, to be honest, because looking back at some of the results that they had in 2019 and in the early stages of 2020, they certainly were looking a little bit lackluster. And whether you sort of put that down to communication issues or maybe the team not meshing or not having enough time, I think that's certainly another debate in itself. But I think what can't really be debated is that this new Tyloo roster is actually looking a lot better than what the previous Tyloo roster looked like. Once we've seen the addition here of Slowly and Danking, I think that the team has actually gone from strength to strength, and they've really improved quite substantially in quite a short amount of time. It's really been only about 3 or 4 months since these two joined the roster, and they've pretty much looked better as they've gone throughout these competitions. And to look back at the very first one that they played in, which was Road to Rio, they even took second place there. They did lose to Tiger in the grand final, but admittedly, it was quite a close game, actually, and it could have well gone the way of Tyloo. So I think even from the outset, once we saw this roster initially come together as a 5-core Chinese roster, we already saw improvements starting to be made for Tyloo. And now, as we've seen them play in DreamHack Masters Spring and in the ESL Pro League Season 12 qualifiers, they have gone from strength to strength, and they've looked even better as they've gone through those tournaments, particularly in matchups against Vici, who is arguably the second best team, or even in some cases, some people think that they are the best team still in the Asian region. It's certainly a top 3 discussion between Tyloo, Tiger, and Vici. But Tyloo have consistently been beating Vici. In fact, of their last 7 matches or last 7 meetings in 2020, Vici won the first 2, which was before the roster changes came through. And since the roster changes have come through, Tyloo's won every single one of those matches. And the matches have gotten even more one-sided the more we've seen from them. Going back to Road to Rio and going back to DreamHack Masters Spring, there was close matches between these teams there. But heading into Pro League qualifiers, and now even what we saw in PAL Summer 2020 a couple of nights ago, Vici just kind of got demolished, unfortunately, by Tyloo. So it seems like not only is Tyloo on the up and up, but Vici's on a downward trend. And they seem to sort of be going kind of hand in hand with those results. But like I've said, they've looked like they've gotten better as we've gone through more recent times and more recent results for Tyloo. And that's not to say that they haven't been without their issues. I mean, they've lost to quite a few teams that they probably shouldn't have. They've lost to D13, they lost to BTRG, they've lost to Invictus. And obviously I mentioned Tiger already in Road to Rio that they lost to. So it hasn't been without its sort of ups and downs for Tyloo. But I think if you look at the general trend, you can see since Danking and Slowly have joined this roster, things have looked a lot better for Tyloo. And I think for the majority of people that maybe don't pay too much attention to Asian Counter-Strike, Slowly and Danking are probably 2 players that you might not have heard of all that much, but they have actually been competing within the Chinese scene for quite a long time, both playing on eHome for a little while. In fact, for Slowly, it was quite a long while. It was like almost a couple of years. Danking was about 6 months or so towards the end there, after he joined Tyloo and then left Tyloo, which is already sort of an interesting discussion to begin with, because it kind of shows you that Tyloo have already had their eyes on Danking from the outset. So he's gone out of Tyloo, he's come back into eHome, he's played with Slowly a little bit there, and to be honest, they played really well in that team, even in the minor closed qualifier for the Chinese region. Both of these players were pretty up there as far as individuals are concerned. I think Danking was actually the highest rated individual in that competition. And for eHome, they finished in 3rd place, obviously behind Tyloo and Vici, but that's still a pretty good result considering the strength of the Chinese region at the time. So with all this sort of COVID-19 stuff going on and the roster changes that had to come through for Tyloo because Freeman and Zeta ended up moving back to their home countries, it seemed like sort of the perfect storm for Slowly and Danking to join the core roster, because they were already signed to Tyloo. to sort of make a secondary team or an academy team. But they've kind of got that call up to go into the primary team. And I got to say, I think it's actually working for this Chinese roster. And I mean, there's a few reasons for it. Obviously, for China as a region, we've never really seen any sort of great Chinese AWPers, I don't think, at least not in recent times. You have to look more towards Southeast Asia and obviously the rest of Asia to sort of find the majority of good AWPers from this region. And that's even, to be fair, where Vici and Tyloo have been looking. I mean, you look at Kaze, obviously coming from Malaysia, and Vici right now, and generally considered one of the best, if not the best AWPer within the region. And then there's Xcurit even further back for Tyloo, going back from Indonesia, and then more recently, they've sort of tried to bring Zeta into the fold from Korea. So it just seems like, at least as far as Tyloo is concerned, the organization is concerned, that there's not necessarily a huge wealth of AWPing talent within the Chinese region. But now that Danking's finally got his second call up to Tyloo, he certainly looks like an exciting prospect and one of those individuals that, being quite a young guy himself, I think he's 20 years old, would hopefully be one of the sort of rising stars from the Chinese region. And so far, there's no reason to imagine that that is not going to be the case. Slowly, on the other hand, he's been around quite a long time, and he's sort of a super solid player that we've been seeing in the Chinese region for quite a long while. And you probably wouldn't necessarily look toward him as being like one of these great players or anything like that, because I think there's any number of riflers that you can pluck out of the Chinese region. And, you even look at somebody, Attacker and Summer, and you think, well, why do they need someone else, sort of thing. It's not like there's just this one standout individual, which in my mind is Danking, as far as the AWPers are concerned, because there are so many riflers in China that can kind of get the job done. But slowly, he's a super solid entry player. He's a very solid CT side player as well. He tends to be the guy that comes on the rotates and sort of is that clutch player as well when things kind of get down to quite close situations. And in fact, he has, I think, better clutch stats than any of the other players on the Tyloo roster in the last 3 months. So he's certainly doing something right. I think he's come into this roster and performed really, really admirably. And especially given the fact that, for him and even for Danking as well, I think this sort of goes for both of them, that this is their biggest team that they've ever been in. And quite frankly, this could be their career, right? If you make this one moment work right now in this Tyloo roster and you stay in Tyloo for the better part of, a few years, then you're making bank, quite frankly. It's the best team in China. It's the best team in Asia. And historically, they've even been able to perform internationally. Now, I don't know whether or not that is going to be something that this current iteration of the roster is going to be able to do, or if it's going to require some more changes. But I think it's certainly fair to say that they're looking like the best team in China at the moment, and potentially even the best team in Asia. We'll have to wait until the end of PAL 2020, PAL Summer 2020 to sort of figure that out, whether or not they're able to beat Tiger, or whether or not Tiger is able to hold on to that title. As at least in my opinion, based on the Road to Rio results, I think Tiger is up there as probably the strongest competing team form-wise at the moment. But in the long term, in my opinion, I think actually Tyloo is going to overtake them. I don't think we've seen the peak yet of the Tyloo roster. I think Slowly and Danking have a lot of work to do. Not necessarily a lot of work to do, but a lot of growing to do as individuals and as players. And I think given extra time in this roster with the experience that the Tyloo players provide, the core 3 players provide, but not only that, but the organization as well behind them, I think has quite a lot of pedigree and certainly seems to have an eye for talent when it comes to the Chinese CSGO region. So the longer that they're able to stay in that Tyloo roster, I think the better it's going to be for not only themselves, but also for Tyloo. So I don't see really any reason why Tyloo would be making any roster changes at the moment. And granted, they have made a lot of roster changes fairly recently, over the course of the last 12 months or so, trying to find this perfect core roster. But I definitely feel like they've kind of landed on it at the moment. Having got the 5 core Chinese players is such a big deal for me, given the fact that that's not going to be an issue for the communication now for Tyloo. And it's just a case of getting these new guys up to speed with the Tyloo organization and up to the level that Attacker, Summer, and somebody have been able to hit. I think it also sort of frees those 3 up as well, having a couple of new guys coming into the roster with a lot of heavy firepower. You let Slowly get those entries on the T side, and that sort of gives the likes of somebody a little bit more room to work with. Even on the CT side, this sort of frees somebody up a little bit because Slowly is just such a solid CT-sided player. Danking, arguably one of the best AWPers in the Asian region at the moment, but I think we do have to wait and see over the long term how he's going to perform, because yes, his performances have been super solid and he's been really, really good of late, but if it's going to be sort of a 3-month wonder or a 6-month wonder, it's probably not going to be what Tyloo is looking for long term. With that said and done, though, I think that, to be honest, Tyloo have found the winning combination, at least for the next 12 months or so. I don't see why they would be making any roster changes now that the RMR system is underway. They've obviously got some points already from Road to Rio. They're going to be getting some points from PAL 2020 Summer. So in that HLTV article that sort of broke the news that Zeta and Freeman were leaving the roster, it sort of indicated that there was a possibility they would be coming back. I don't personally think that's going to be a possibility. Maybe for Freeman if things don't go particularly well for this roster, but Zeta's already announced his move over to Valorant, and I don't see him coming back, and I certainly don't see him coming back into Tyloo, particularly given the way that Dan King is playing at the moment. So for me, this seems like the roster that Tyloo has been looking for.